in representing entities in the valley.
Mr. Chairman, I had asked earlier if we could have just a comment again from the opposition, leader of opposition and the rail authority to respond to some of the public comments being made. I think there's some value in spending that time, be it 10 or 15 minutes per individual, because they came with the research data and some other things, and I think there would be value in asking them to do some wrap-up for us.
If it's the will of the board to have a wrap-up session,
That makes sense.
then we'll do that. How does 5 minutes sound? Maximum 5 minutes for a wrap-up session by the two speakers that we had earlier. Since we started with Mr. Brady, why don't we start with Mr. Morales this time?
Thank you, Supervisor. I think it's important to recognize that where we are as a state is, with regard to this program, is not unlike where we were as a state starting the state highway system, starting the state water project, starting the UC system. This is not a project. This is a program. It's a generational investment in this state. And if you look back at what has made this state what it is, they were bold, tough decisions that were every bit as difficult as this one is. The vote in the legislature to approve the state water project was a one-vote margin. The vote to approve the master plan for higher education, which created the UC system and the Cal State system as we know it, as the premier research institution in the world, was a one-vote margin. These things are always controversial, and if you're looking for an infrastructure investment that's not going to have impacts, I don't think you'll find one. It's our job to work through those, to try to minimize those, obviously, and deal with those. But I think to have an expectation that we're not going to have impacts is just unrealistic. Let me respond to a few specific things that came up. And I also just have to say I'm a citizen as well as my official capacity, and I find it offensive that people who want jobs are considered special interests. We should all want jobs. We should want to create jobs and create a stronger economy. And that's part of what this investment can do. A lot of issues came up about the right-of-way process and purchasing of properties. A few things, and I think some of the speakers and the Yurgats, I believe, and I want to confirm this, but I believe they are in the section, the Fresno to Bakersfield environmental section, which was just approved 2 weeks ago. By law, we cannot initiate the right-of-way process with people in those corridors until we have an approved environmental document. So although there's been lots of speculation about what would be happening, we cannot actually engage until that point. That process is starting now. It was an assertion that we're not subject to environmental laws. Absolutely not the case. We are fully subjected to them and have just spent years going through those processes. You can look at the environmental process as a delay or going through the process. And, part of that process is responding to public input and public concerns. Changes in the alignment that come out of that public comment. We had thousands of comments through that process. Our job, part of it, is to respond to those and adapt and deal with those. That's part of what drives cost increases, part of what drives time over it. I don't think that's a delay. That's the process. It is what we have to work with. I have to take some exception to Ms. Rodabau's characterization about the Merced and Madera agreement, including the premise that they successfully sued. In fact, they lost in court. But we moved forward with them to a settlement, as she said. And that settlement is important. What it did do primarily, it did two things. One, it set aside a special fund for preservation of ag land, but more what she spoke to, and I agree, is it set up a process that otherwise we would have gone through arguably on a one-by-one or a case-by-case basis. To now we set up the procedures going forward that will govern not only Merced and Madera, but our entire system, that we think will actually be very beneficial to all parties involved and will result in the preservation of land. With regard to the impacts on ag, I also have to point out, up the entire valley, up and down the entire valley, we will impact approximately 4,500 acres. The widening of, or the improvements in 99, a little bit north of here, in a 7-mile stretch, are taking almost 1,300 acres of farmland. Here in Fresno County, over the last few decades, you have lost 50,000 acres of farmland to development. High-speed rail can help reverse that trend, frankly, by focusing development. That's part of why the city is so supportive of it. But I think, again, when you hear about impacts on ag, you have to keep it in perspective with other projects. We are doing everything we can to work with those interests, and we'll continue to do so. Just quickly, Mr. Larson raised a
1,000 acres to development in what time frame?
it was over, I believe, the last 30 years.
Oh, the last 30 years, yeah.
That's 50,000 acres of prime farmland lost to development. And I don't need to, you drive anywhere up and down the valley and you see new development happening everywhere. Mr. Larson, Supervisor, you raised a question about ensuring jobs could be local. And it was a very important point and one we're very aware of. And frankly, shame on us if we don't learn from past mistakes. You're right, there is a federal restriction on local preference in hiring. I'm pleased to say that the administration's proposal for reauthorization of transportation programs would ease that. But in the meantime, we worked around that and got agreement from them to put into place a targeted worker program, which actually does let us ensure that jobs are created here locally. And in fact, over 80% of all the work hours performed so far in this program have been done here locally on this project, and that's what we intend to see happen go forward.
Thank you.
Just one last comment. Yeah, two last quick comments. Costs, and we hear a lot about the costs. Keep in mind these are at this point estimates for a program over a period of a lot of years, and we lay those out, the methodology, all the calculations of that. It's again as if back in the 50s the state had laid out the cost of the state highway program, putting it out there. That's again really what we're talking about. 15 billion of the 68 is time. It's escalation. So the faster we build, the less it will cost. And the practical experience, just so you know, the one contract that we have let, the major contract, just under $1 billion, came in significantly under estimate so far. So, the track record to date, the actual track record is we're going in the right direction on those. And then just lastly, on a question was raised about ridership. The ridership estimates have gone through extensive review by the federal government, by independent peer review groups. It is available in excruciating detail to anyone who wants to look at it, and has been determined by actual experts who work in these fields, independent, to be reliable and state-of-the-art.
Thank you.
And I'm obviously happy to respond to any questions.
Definitely. Thank you. Mr. Brady?
Thank you. It was interesting. I am proud to say that I am the attorney for Kings County, your neighbor. 3 years ago, that County Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to oppose this project. I'm working for free. I will point out that the High-Speed Rail Authority not only has hundreds of people from the Attorney General's office helping them, but they pay outside lawyers, up to date, about $14 million. If I win the case, the court may give me a fee paid by the High-Speed Rail Authority, but I've been working on this thing for 8 years for free. In today's world, there is nothing more important than credibility. I just heard Mr. Morales talk about costs. Do you remember the Boston Big Dig? Supposed to cost about $2.8 billion. It cost $23 billion. That is not an old project. You know who the contractor was, or the supervisor, the main company supervising the construction? Parsons Brinkerhoff. Ever heard of them? Mm-hmm. High-Speed Rail's main supervisor. Do you know that Boston fined them millions of dollars for their malfeasance? They came close to getting into criminal trouble. Now, credibility. Ms. Puchigian, Mr. Larson, Ms. Case, McNary, have all inquired, and Mr. Pereira inquired in May of 2006, are the voters getting what they were promised? A genuine high-speed electrified system. Do you know that in all the business plans that have been proposed by the high-speed rail, they have no plans to electrify the first thing that they build? It'll be aid to conventional rail, not electrified, when Proposition 1A requires that. Why in the world won't they electrify anything? It's just unbelievable. What they say is, well, someday we'll come back and electrify it, but we're not going to do so initially. It's unbelievable. Listen to some of the other credibility issues, and this touches on whether the voters are getting what they were promised. Do you know that 2 years ago, in the Senate Transportation Committee, the chairman asked Dan Richards, who was sitting right there, he said, we've been here all morning. We've heard a lot. What, are we going to get high-speed rail for all this? And you know what Dan Richards said? No, period. But you're going to get a lot. No, but you're going to get a lot. You know what this project has changed into? An aid to railroad systems. It's no longer a genuine high-speed rail. Obviously, they have $6 billion for a $150 billion project. You'll never have high-speed rail. Well, the voters did not vote to give general assistance to railroad systems all over the state. That's what's happened. The voters are not being given what they were promised. Do you know that Mr. Richards, well, let me touch on this trip time issue, which is very important, and I didn't have time to address it before. The most important thing for a passenger is, remember your kids in the back seat, when will I get there? They were promised 2 hours and 40 minutes, a mandatory requirement. Mr. Morales today says, that's not a mandatory promise. It just means that we have to design in the computer the system in such a way that it can get there in 2 hours and 45 minutes, or 2 hours and 40 minutes. Well, you can put anything into a computer simulator. He is telling you that that is not a promise to the voters. That was a promise to entice them to support high-speed rail. If they do not keep that promise, the whole project fails. It's as simple as that. And listen to what the facts are. They submitted a declaration from an expert who plotted every foot of this trip from L.A. Union Station to the Transbay Terminal. He had the train going up the mountain and reaching the top at 150 miles an hour. What train can climb a mountain at 150? Do you know that he has the train going down the Tehachapis for 15 miles at 220 miles an hour? Would any human being ever get on a train going down a mountain at 220? That's their expert. He has the train going through your city, downtown, and the city of Bakersfield, just one more minute, through your downtown at 220. Why? They have to have it going that fast to meet the 2 hour, 20-minute computer simulated plan, which is a fraud on the voters. This was so embarrassing that Dan Richards made a public statement saying, oh, we would never go through your cities at 220. We would only do 80. Well, if they do 80, they can never meet the mandatory 2 hour and 40-minute goal. Credibility is everything. You've been at this for 6 years. A lot has changed since May 2012 when Mr. Perea wrote that letter. You know a lot. You have enough information to vote, and you should vote to withdraw your support. One final passing positive comment. You need water. I'm a lawyer. It is very easy for the legislature, no signature gathering necessary, to propose an initiative, a 3-sentence initiative, and place it before the voters. The initiative would say this: the remaining funds in the High-Speed Rail Fund are hereby redesignated for water projects, for improvement to Highway 99, and repair of our freeways, which is a scandal. We've gone from number 1 to number 49 in our freeway system. Then if the people approve it, and you've heard the public opinion polls, they love water, they love freeways, and they like to see them fixed and repaired and realigned and improved. They would vote for it. No signature gathering. This could be done next year. Special election. A positive alternative. I urge you to vote to withdraw your support for this project.
Thank you. Before we begin deliberations, I'd like to get a sense on what the sentiment of the board is. We're approaching a 3-hour mark on this, and I'm wondering if we should consider taking a break at 1 o'clock, maybe for half an hour. So use the next 35 minutes to get into the meat, but not lose the momentum. So maybe a half-hour break for lunch. Does that meet with everyone's?
Maybe we just keep going. I mean, we have the momentum here. Let's finish the discussion.
I don't mind going till 1:30 and just, I think we should be done by then.
By 1:30?
What do you think?
I'll eat from the dais, man. I don't care.
Yeah, I was going to say, nobody makes their best decision based on being hungry and no breaks for an extended period of time. But that being said, this, again, is a very important issue, and I think that the deliberation is very important. And being able to ask questions of our speakers, particularly our two, what I will call the experts on high-speed rail, who are here today, and appreciate their attendance.
Okay.
I'm not sure I, as one member, will be ready to make a decision today. I mean, even when something goes to court, the judge takes a little bit of time to think about what's okay and what's not okay, and I think this is a really important decision. So
Mr. Chairman,
I still have a lot of questions, and the audience needs a break. They've been pretty intense today, and we appreciate
if that is your board's desire, then do you wish, because we have outside counsel that we're trying to schedule for close, are you planning then to have close at the end of the day?
Probably.
Okay.
I think everything has gone sideways because of the length of this particular issue. So
And we
everything
can tell staff to return at 2 o'clock for any consent or remaining items on the regular?
Yes, and if for any folks that are here for the consent items that have been pulled, please accept our apology. This high-speed rail issue is certainly a big one, and it's taking a lot of time. The pulled consent items are going to have to go into the later afternoon once we finish with the rail issue. So once again, we apologize. I'm hearing mixed messages. We want to work through. How do we feel over here?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I'm going to be able to make a decision here that would really reflect my feelings when you're in support of something and yet you're questioning it seriously.
Okay.
And I think of one person that's not here today that's made a request, and he's our representative on the high-speed rail board, and that's Mr. Tom Richards.
Okay.
And he called me and he says, I want to testify. I happen to be on the East Coast. I would love to testify at that hearing. Is there some way we could stall it till the 29th? My question to you is, if we're not ready to make a decision today, would it be wrong to bring it back on the 29th?
That's a very good question. Rather than get into a discussion, unless folks here want to, because we have two experts, do we want to continue with the full vetting of this issue from the board, or if there are two members that wish this item to be returned, do we stop the discussion and bring this item back?
I would like
do you
to
have a comment on that?
questions answered, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that has some questions that other board members would also, and to take advantage that Mr. Morales has traveled to Fresno today to be with us, and I think that's huge, and I want to say thank you for doing that. But I do have questions on some more detail-related items.
Yeah, so maybe we could just answer questions to ask and have the questions answered and bring it back to 29th for further discussion.
All right.
I'm prepared to make a decision today,
I
just
think
to go on record.
I think there are a number of folks. Why don't we start the discussion and continue on? I think at least till 1:30. Is that the sentiment on this side? Sure. And but we should be prepared to take a break. We've been at this for some time. So with that being said, let's start the discussion and deliberation. Who wishes to speak first? Member Larson, you want to start us off?
All right.
Well, I think Mr. Morales kind of answered my question on the labor situation, that you've got a way of working around that, because we really got beat down on that federal prison. And even though this is a state project, that's federal money you're using, and that's what I suspected could happen. Now, if you can assure me that you're going to hire everything local, that's fine. and understanding. I'm reasonable enough to know that there's talent that you're probably going to have to bring in from the outside. Yes.
Yeah, our absolute commitment is to ensure that there's as much benefit in the state of California and locally as possible as we go forward with the program. What I mentioned earlier was something that we developed called the Targeted Worker Program, which lets us tell the contractors they need to hire from areas with high unemployment. It also includes a preference for veterans. It has the impact of, given the economics in this area, of making it, in effect, a local hiring preference. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the initial jobs coming out. 86% of all the hours worked are being worked by local people coming out of the halls here locally. And that will be the case going forward. We also have a 30% small business set-aside program. We spoke of some of those numbers. Small businesses tend to be local businesses, and that's, again, what we're seeing on this project. I mentioned 47 Fresno-based companies. We are doing everything we can to try to make sure there's as much local benefit accrued, not only long-term, but during the construction of the project as possible.
I would hope you wouldn't just look in the city of Fresno, because I can...
No. When I say Fresno, I mean the county and the region.
40% unemployment.
When I say Fresno, I mean the county, certainly, absolutely, sir.
Supervisor Pachugian, did you have questions you'd like to
I do,
start?
but I'd prefer to be last, if you don't mind. Might as well just
Okay.
work our way over.
And since I've been put in the place of chair, I'm going to go through the board. Supervisor Perea, did you have questions?
I'll go last.
Well, we have two last. Gee, I'll go last. So
We'll
we'll have
flip
three
for the
last.
last.
No,
I'll go now.
I will go ahead. I was just going to go ahead with some of the questions to kind of get clear in my own mind. Prop 1A was approval of bonds, and we've heard testimony that we got $3.3 billion from the federal government, and Prop 1A only allows for matching federal dollars. Have there been any bonds floated in the state of California to support the high-speed rail effort to date?
Right. Prop 1A provided a total of $9.95 billion in bond funds. $950 million of that went to what are called connectivity projects, which were to tie in local transit systems into ultimately the high-speed rail system. And then the remainder was for the development of the core system, which included not just the construction, but also all of the environmental development design work associated. So when you get through it all at the end of the day, and that 10% was allowed for those costs. So there's about $8 billion of construction money that is available under Prop 1A for the program.
So the state did, in fact, float $9.9 billion.
And so there were bonds issued initially for that preliminary work. I believe it's $400 million total for the environmental planning, design type of work. We have not, the legislature has appropriated, but because of the litigation, we have not issued, the state has not issued, the treasurer issues bonds for the construction activities as of yet. So right now, what we're spending and what you're seeing here, creating the jobs and doing the work in Fresno, is utilizing part of that $3.3 billion of federal money that was awarded to the project for here in the Valley.
So that's not borrowed money, that's just, well,
Those are federal
depending on your
grants.
opinion of the federal government and how it's funding itself currently, but in fact, they didn't float a bond. That is part of their appropriations, that
Correct.
they go forward with a normal budget.
Correct. Right. And yes.
And that's helpful. I just want to understand at what point are we in terms of taking on debt and really the issues related to many comments made today about all the job creation. But if you create jobs by borrowing money, is that really creating jobs? And that's the question I come back to. If this is borrowed money and you're giving somebody a job and they're leaving another job, when do you run out of money? When the borrower says no mas. In your plans, what is the current proposed ticket price between San Francisco and Los Angeles?
We have made some assumptions for purposes of modeling and developing all the economics of what the price would be. It is based on, for the end-to-end trip, 82%, I believe it is, of the lowest end airfare between those two markets. So it's basically you take a Southwest early advanced ticket price and you discount it. And that was based on what's been done around the world on these systems. There are other cost estimates then, say, between Fresno and San Jose and others. I don't know those off the top of my head. I'd be happy to provide you those.
And I was just looking for a ballpark, and I don't know if we can go with the lowest end ticket. The last time I looked, when I had a short-term need to get to Los Angeles and I was going to travel from Fresno, that plane ticket was going to be $700.
Yeah, and
kind of shocking. But if we're in that range,
no, I want to. That's an important.
we could have close to a $600 ticket for the
that's
trade.
very important clarification. Again, the 80% is the LA to San Francisco leg.
Okay.
That's that market. The intermediate points, there's a separate pricing assumption based on mileage and other things. So a typical ticket price, again, I'd be happy to get you the particulars, but from Fresno to LA, I believe is somewhere in the $50 range for a ticket. I'll be happy to get you that.
So you're
price.
keeping your projections based on mileage, unlike the airlines who are, I think, put a volume piece in there that make it very expensive. And again, some of my struggle is conceptually believing that the Central Valley would be very well served by having a higher level connection to our business hubs in California, LA, San Francisco, because we can't get headquarters of big companies because they can't get here. And I've heard that. What's your basic contingency plan if you can't get the number of riders necessary to break even? Because again, this program was supposed to be a break-even program,
right,
not requiring further subsidy.
Right. If I could just, on your previous point, I think it's a really important one about the connection of the economies. And there was a report that I'd be happy to provide, I would commend to you, recently done looking at the Northeast Corridor. And basically what it said was that because of the Amtrak system and the rail connection, you essentially have a contiguous economy from Washington to Boston. And that creates huge strength of that economy. And what it means, much to your point, is because of the proximity by rail between, say, a Wilmington and a Philadelphia, or a Newark and New York, Baltimore and Washington, companies locate in those secondaries, the smaller cities, and can thrive there because they're connected to the larger cities. And that's part of what this is about, is creating that sort of connection. And I can tell you when we talk to folks in the Bay Area Council, which is the public policy arm of their chamber, they talk about that and they look at the Valley as that, the ability to establish lower cost, it's not just about outsourcing jobs, it's about moving functions here. It's not just about having people commute there, but actually creating facilities here. Same with Bakersfield and Los Angeles and Palmdale and Los Angeles. On the ridership, right, Prop 1A says very clearly there cannot be a subsidy of the operations. There's an important distinction, and Supervisor Larson, you made a point about the Washington transit system and others. You're right, public mass transit does require subsidies. Basically, almost all passenger transportation requires subsidies. Roads, people don't like to think of it this way, but roads get subsidized by not just gas tax, by the general.
Isn't this a passenger train?
There are a few exceptions to that. Airlines, if they're run right, can operate at a profit, and high-speed rail does. And it's because it really acts much more like an airline than it does a commuter train or an Amtrak or a local transit. The economics are like that. That's what's true all over the world. When these systems operate, they operate at a profit. And as I mentioned before, Amtrak's Acela service does the same, and it is generating a significant profit that is subsidizing the rest of the Amtrak system. So all of our work has been done to ensure that that the ridership demand is there. Mitigation steps would be you adjust the service levels to ensure that your costs are, this is all about balancing costs and revenues. But also that will be the discipline of bringing in a private sector operator. This system will be operated by a private concessionaire whose experience and expertise is in doing exactly that.
And you said you have a new report from the Acela system, and it's the only comparable I would identify for us to take a hard look at. And again, I think any decision we make needs to really be based on the best information we possibly can. The most recent item that's come up that certainly gives me the greatest amount of heartburn, and I would like to find a way to support this program, but I'm at a point in terms of the funding piece I cannot get past in terms of potential impacts to our state and our state's economy, because I don't agree with some of the directions we're heading. And I think not too many people talk about it, but Apple was developed in a garage in our state, and they're now headquartered in Ireland because of taxation issues. So let's not be, we have to be mindful of impacts. Cap and trade. Cap and trade capturing the cost of all of our fuels. We already pay as a state about $1 a gallon more than anybody else does for our fuel. All you have to do is travel for vacation, and all of a sudden gas gets cheap, diesel gets cheap. And are we prepared to pay $2 a gallon more for each and every gallon of fuel we need in our vehicles? And literally, that's not just when you need to drive, because some people say, well, I'll just drive less. Well, yes, but those 2 apples and a peach that somebody bought for $4 will suddenly cost $6 because you can't get them here because of the cost of transportation. So in terms of utilizing cap and trade money, there's, this governor is saying, well, we're going to cure all that by sending it to high-speed rail. What is ultimately the plan in terms of where your analysis has been for cap and trade revenue? Is it to pay for construction and capital costs, or is there a plan that it will then be utilized to further subsidize the rail line? Can you kind of just flesh that out for us? It'd be very helpful.
Right. I think it might be helpful to step back again to look at what Prop 1A and what it provided and didn't provide, frankly. As I said, as we went through, about $8 billion in construction value against, and you hear a lot of numbers thrown around, but if you go back and look at the voter guide to Proposition 1A, it was a $45 billion cost estimate. That was in 2008 dollars, which was about $54 billion today. Prop 1A provided $8 billion against that $45 billion. It said that 1A had, in effect, had to be matched 1-for-1 by saying it couldn't account for more than half of the funding for any segment. But fact is, it provided only, about a fifth, a little less than a fifth of the total price estimated at the time. That meant, by definition, there would have to be other sources of funds coming in. It didn't provide for them, but it meant there would have to be other sources. Combination of federal, private, or other state funds. So the use of cap and trade is really consistent with that in terms of having to find these other sources to build out the system. It is intended entirely, and under the legislation that's been passed, it is restricted entirely to the construction of the system, not for the operation of the system. Again, the operation is required to and will be self-sustaining.
And last question, where you mentioned that there are people waiting in the wings for private investment. Could you speak a little bit more about potentials for private investment, what they're looking at, and what would ultimately bring them into this system? I mean, I don't think we should spend a huge amount of money without some pretty strong reliance on that private sector investment. So anything you could add to that?
Sure. There are a number of different ways we expect the private sector will participate, and again, that's based on experience around the world, looking at what's been done in other systems. Ultimately, in the operation of the system, the business model is to award a concession to an operator who would run the system, and in return for the projected revenues coming in, and this would be there based on their projections, they would invest capital for the further expansion of the system. We believe that number is at least in the $12 to $20 billion range. ultimately that would be invested. We're currently in discussions with a number of interested parties about their interest in participating in certain segments. There's some segments that are very attractive for private investment for different reasons. Bringing in expertise in tunneling, for instance, for the Burbank to Palmdale section. I think I mentioned earlier that there were a dozen or so letters from those international private companies sent to the legislature, which, again, we'd be happy to provide for the record and for your review, indicating their interest in how they would participate. I can also tell you we meet at least weekly with different parties who are looking at the program and looking at the opportunities that will come out of it. Our goal is to work to accelerate and bring that private investment forward as much as possible.
All right. Thank you, Member Larson.
Yeah, your predecessor and Dan Richards' predecessor, I'm trying to think of the name of the first gentleman that was on a high-speed rail, was in my office and made the statement that the high-speed rail would actually pay for itself. And I said, wow. I said, well, and he said, and what he meant was that the high-speed rail, the ticket price, and the ridership would pay for the operation of the train. Well, what about the infrastructure? And he said, no, because he said it would never be subsidized. But he said the federal government would build the infrastructure. That's not a subsidy? I mean, how does he figure that it'll never be subsidized if they have to maintain the infrastructure, but the ridership pays for the operation of the train? To me, it looks like it's being subsidized 100%.
The system will be operated and maintained by a private entity. They'll be responsible for the maintenance as well as the operation of it. The underlying infrastructure is a public investment, and that's, again, no different than an airport, no different than a road, no different than any other form of transportation, and that's what was envisioned in 1A. We certainly are not saying that the operations will come back and recoup the capital costs. There are some projections that show that that could be possible, but the design, this is an understanding that this is an investment in public infrastructure. The operation will not be subsidized and will be, in fact, generate sufficient revenues to allow for additional private investment in the expansion of the system.
I've heard both sides of the story that there's not a high-speed rail train in the world that pays for itself, and now you're telling me that they do pay for themselves. What do I do?
We've seen those same things, and I think there's been a one particular report that gets a lot of mileage from some gentlemen on the peninsula, which took a mistake in a report that they now know is a mistake, and they have continued to cite that as evidence that systems don't pay for themselves. There are, I believe, 2 systems in the world that have in fact paid back their capital costs. 2 lines, not entire systems. So they've covered not only their operating, but have paid back the capital investment in them. There are 2 in the world that have been, we don't have high-speed rail obviously here, 2 systems that have paid back both their capital and their operating. Again, our model is, as required under 1A, is that the operations will be self-sustaining.
Who are the 2 ones that have paid?
It is one of the lines, and again, I'd be happy to provide the particulars. There's one of the lines in Japan and one in France.
Japanese. Well, I might take this opportunity. I have a feeling that, based on the sentiment of some supervisors, that this is an issue that warrants probably further discussion and further attention. So I wouldn't be surprised if this issue did come back a week or 2 weeks from now. Anybody who knows me knows that, kind of knows my sentiments toward this project. In my previous capacity as a council member at the city of Fresno, I believe that I kept a very open mind when I came into office after 2008, or January 2009. In 2009, this board, the Fresno County, when I came in, there was a lot of discussion on the merits, and that was the height of the controversy, 2009, 2010, and 11. Those seem to be the years. Obviously, the economy was going through its great downfall, and this was one of the most important issues that we were discussing. So I think members of the City Council tried to keep an open mind on this, and we requested information. And I know that I can't hold you accountable for the acts of your predecessor. Unfortunately, fairly or unfairly, you represent the entity that must be held accountable for the actions or inactions of the past. And there were two other council members and I, and ultimately we were pulling our hair out, trying to get information from the authority, and even resorted, as a matter of last resort, to a press conference identifying the 23 or 26 very specific questions. Because as we heard earlier from Council President Steve Brandow, who was my successor, I represented the Northwest area, which is straight down the proposed path. It was my fiduciary responsibility to look after the interests of my residents, the landowners, the homeowners, the business owners. I took that very seriously. I was extraordinarily upset, but not without good reason. Not only did we not get responses to the questions posed, we received the equivalent, the political equivalent of the middle finger. And that's not something that I think bodes well for a project that is of such great import to not only the state, but is expecting a lot from the valley. Now, so let bygones be bygones of what has passed, especially with before your tenure. I've been critical of high-speed rail for, what is it, 5 years now? This is not an easy issue for this board to take up because of its long history of support. In 2009, this board issued a resolution in support of high-speed rail. So I know that there's a lot of weight to what is happening today, and maybe in 2 weeks from now, whenever the final vote is to occur, to change the direction of the board's sentiment toward this project. So I know that there's a lot of internal pressure on this issue. I don't think it's going to change the outcome of the high-speed rail project. I think that will likely be decided by the courts. I know that there's one piece of legal action, I don't know the exact details of it, but one that I think would probably bode well for everyone in California is the voters decided in 2008 that they wanted a high-speed rail system to the tune of about $10 million out of 1A, 33 billion in total with private investment as well as federal monies. What they voted for in 2008 looks very different than what we're being asked to give effect to today. It was I think it's jumped around, and people say there's always adjustments, and the Big Dig is an example of something that, having gone to school in the greater Boston area, that is a really interesting example of something that just was funneling out pork and all sorts of special deals and special interests that were engendered in the process. But if you had a $33 billion project that ballooned to an estimated 110, that since revised down to around 76, the volatility of numbers it does go back to the credibility of whether we're giving effect to what the voters voted upon in 2008. So if this piece of litigation, which is essentially going to ask, if I'm not mistaken, are we true to the 2008 message? Because I have a feeling that we're probably not. Does that mean that we should never have a train? No. But I think to what symbolic value may exist to this, I think it would be entirely fair that this issue be brought back to the voters. Maybe in that time the numbers will have been solid, the business model will have been solid, and I don't know where the public sentiment will be. I suspect it will be a little bit different, but I think that would be a very fair thing. But we'll see if the court system agrees that what we're doing today is not supported by what was voted upon in 2008. I have a soft spot for the rail maintenance facility. This is part of my internal turmoil, is that I'm critical of this project and have been because the funding sources I don't think are panning out. We know that the House Transportation in the confirmed version by the Senate specifically excludes high-speed rail, so whether Brown can make up the difference with cap and trade, there's going to be litigation with that. And I'm seriously doubtful of private investment, with the one caveat: there will be private investment, so long as there's a baseline guarantor of revenue. And I think what's going to happen is, whether it's Siemens or whether it's Benchmark or whether it's the Japanese, the Spanish, the Germans, or whomever, they're going to want to know that there is a guarantor. This is not just a pure private business model. You're not going to be able to, I don't think we're going to be able to attract them without California serving as guarantor of a baseline return on investment. I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that in the small type of the letters of support that you may have gotten from Siemens and whatnot, there will eventually be a guarantor provision locked in there. It's very difficult for me to comment too much on this, because it's 1 foot in the river, and we are frankly, we're all gussied up and ready for the prom, and this, I feel like kind of like this, the prom was last week. Like, I mean, this seems like the debate that we were having in 2010 and 2011. It's a little unusual to be having it in 2014 when buildings are being demolished right now to make way for the rail. But getting back to the rail facility, I like the idea as a matter of default. If the rail system moves forward and we can't, dissuade the authorities or the agents from participating in a way that would change this, would we benefit from it? Absolutely. I think we would absolutely benefit. Fresno State's educational program, the talent pool, the reversal of the brain drain, there will be all sorts of byproduct benefits to our community. But that is one of those situations where if it certainly comes, would we vote for it? And I think there's been resolutions by this board that specifically exclude, in the spirit that we're voting on our support of the maintenance facility if it does come. I think people that have greater insight into this issue than I do maybe can tell us when this high-speed maintenance facility decision is going to be made. But if I'm looking at competition between Kern and Kings and Madera, then I'm less worried that our decision today or in 2 weeks is going to be determinative, that the rail maintenance facility will be relocated to one of those, because they've already decided to oppose high-speed rail already. So I think the rise and fall in the location of the maintenance facility will be decided on the merits of Fresno. I would be surprised if this deliberative body, by a single vote, changes the location of the maintenance facility, should it be awarded, especially when our fiercest competitors have already signaled their opposition to this. there's just, I don't even know where to begin. You know, I'm going to pass the baton on to my colleagues because there's just so much that can be said, but it's 1 o'clock right now. Member Pachegan, Member Perea, did you want to?
Close.
It's my agenda item.
I'll close. You started, I'll close.
Okay, do you want to flip a coin, folks? Exactly.
Well, maybe we save our comments for the 29th.
Well, we are waiting for Member
I'd like to wait
Case.
for Supervisor Case, and then I will make a few.
Mr.
All
Chairman,
right, I
can
think she's returning. Yes, sir. Who spoke? Oh, please, Mr. Morales.
Can I
Yes.
respond to a few of your comments, or if that's appropriate, or?
You know what? If you'd like to, I think in the interest of time, I think we're going to try to figure out if this item is going to be brought back. Did you want to? Do you want to pick up the baton?
I will. First of all, to address Mr. Richards, I did get a message from him as well, and if we've sat here all morning and we've heard a lot, and would be more than happy to hear more next time. Having said that, we have been working on this for 7 years, and so I don't know what more information that we can address and more questions we can answer. I would prefer, if the desire of the board is to move forward with the resolution, is to, vote to move it forward, and in 2 weeks put it on the agenda. And of course, Mr. Richards can be here to address, and we can go through all this again in 2 weeks if that's what we choose to do. It's not, for all the folks that are here, first I want to thank you for everybody that was here telling us their personal stories. We know, I think maybe even the High Speed Rail Authority would agree that their communications have been marginal. I think everybody's nodding their heads, yeah, that's true. And Mr. Morales made a good point that if there's an expectation that there won't be any interruption to lands or homes or businesses, that's not realistic when you have something of this magnitude. But the bigger question, I think, for this board, and, if you choose to wait 2 weeks, I obviously respect that decision, but we have had 7 years, and the question today is, we're not going to solve the problem of the communication problems of the High Speed Rail Authority. The question today is, does this board, knowing what we know now, knowing what we know since 2012, do we still support this project the way it's written? And it was actually 2007. It was a previous board, so I know Supervisor Borges and I weren't here for that initial resolution. But knowing what we know now, and we have taken a lot of time to learn what we know now. I did go through the initiative. I'd like to ask Mr. Morales, just as I flip through this, should the voters be able to, what's your opinion? Should the voters be able to rely on the initiative? Should they be able to rely on promises made in the initiative? It seems to me you guys have totally disregarded the initiative and changed this project drastically. Do you think we should be able to rely on what you asked us to vote on?
I would not at all agree that we've changed the program and disregarded anything. I think what you've seen is the reality of implementing a program. There was I sometimes refer to it as the Christmas morning scenario, where I think people voted for this and just there was the sense that we'd all wake up one day and it would just be there.
Because we didn't know enough on how it would be implemented to vote against it at the time. Is that what you're saying? We weren't smart enough, voters weren't smart enough to know
No, it's not
that
what I'm
it was
saying.
going, well,
that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
No, that's not. And in fact, I think there's been a lot of talk about polls, and I would also say the Public Policy Institute of California, arguably or probably the most reputable nonpartisan poll, had its latest statewide poll in the spring of this year, and it in fact found 53% of adults in California continue to favor the program, and 2/3 of them, and this is consistent with the findings they've made over the last 3 years, 2/3 say that it is somewhat or very important for the future of the state. So, and we've seen in other related measures, there's an underlying agreement. There's controversy. I mean, believe me, I'm not in any way trying to suggest there aren't issues, concerns. We have an absolute obligation to answer questions, to be accountable. But I think at the end of the day, we are moving forward with the program that was envisioned. Contrary to assertions, it will perform as required under 1A and will deliver the benefits as
Mr.
required
Morales,
under 1A.
the initiative, the pamphlet said, the authority estimated in 2006 that the total cost to develop and construct the entire high-speed rail system would be $45 billion. It didn't say in current dollars. So anyone reading that, except members of the High-Speed Rail Authority, would assume that the entire high-speed rail system would be developed and constructed for $45 billion. Is that accurate? Can you do it for $45 billion?
Our current projections are $67 billion.
Okay. So, all right. It also goes on to say that operating costs will probably be $1 billion, in excess of $1 billion, and that potentially fully offset by revenue from the fares paid. Is fully offset by revenues from the fares paid. Is there any way that can happen?
Yes, we've discussed that at some length here today, I believe.
Well,
and
we
that
have
is what
discussed it.
That's what our business plan shows, and there's a whole section in the business plan on the modeling that's associated with that and shows how the revenues...
Well, this morning's cost to get from Fresno to Los Angeles on a one-way flight is anywhere from $206 to $363. So 80% would be $120 to $240, well above the $50. I didn't get to that one yet. Let me get to that one.
Well, as I explained a question from Supervisor Case McNary earlier, the 80% is relative to the direct San Francisco to Los Angeles fare. It's not 80% of all markets in there. The Fresno, LA, Fresno, San Jose, Fresno, San Francisco fare is not based on airfares, it's based on distances. We have that in our plan. I'll be happy to provide it for you, but it is nowhere approaching that level. It's not based on the same assumption as the end-to-end market.
And is the end-to-end market less? Are you saying from Fresno to Los Angeles it would be less? So it's going to be more than that numbers I just stated. Well,
no, it
so
would
the
be
initiative,
less than that.
The initiative information said travel from Los Angeles to San Francisco in about 2 hours and 40 minutes for about $50 a person. Are you saying that's accurate? No, you've already said that's not accurate. Don't try to, excuse me, but I mean, you've already said that's not accurate. So let's just move on. You've already said that's not accurate. Okay.
It's also not our statement.
Yeah, well, it was in the initiative, and this is what voters, the vice chairman of the California High-Speed Rail Authority signed it and put it in here, so why wouldn't people think it's accurate? Talks about 160,000 construction-related jobs and 450,000 permanent jobs. That's not accurate. It's right here in the initiative.
Why is that not accurate, then?
Huh?
That is accurate.
Oh, you think?
Yes.
What are your facts, Supervisor, to say it's not? What are your facts?
450,000 permanent jobs. You believe that's accurate?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
What are your facts saying that's not?
I'm going to go through my stuff. I've got a whole list of stuff.
Were you planning on going through all the items today,
Well,
or did you want to go through the 29?
I just want someone to recognize that the initiative is nothing. I mean, you can say it's similar. It really is nothing. What you promised the voters is not what the voters are getting. And that's why we're here today. We're not here because Mr. So-and-so had trouble talking to the appraiser. And, I mean, I have sympathy for everybody that got up here. the Chinatown, the appraiser from Texas, the whatever it is. I have total sympathy for all that. But that's really not why we're here today. And you know what? I have lots of things I'd like to talk about. The time is running, but I'd like to go on for a couple more minutes, unless you tell me right now that there's 3 people that want to push this off. 7 years isn't enough to make a decision today. Then basically,
Better keep going.
don't waste my time. I mean, if you don't want me to waste your time is what I mean. If you don't want me to waste your time.
You're not wasting, I don't think, anybody's time, because I think the issue is complicated. It has a lot of moving parts. It has a lot of passion for a lot of perspectives. And I think to do the due deliberation to what we're doing and the fact that people have traveled today, I think we need to go through the details. I mean, the devil's in the details. It always is.
Mr. Brady stated that the House, Senate, and President Obama have determined through the last 2 budgets that there'll be no more money.
Not the case at all. There have been provisions attached to the House-passed appropriations bills which said that no new money could go to the program. Those provisions did not survive the House-Senate conferences, were not signed into law by the President. Essentially, what those provisions have said is you can't get money that you haven't asked for from a pot we haven't created yet. That's been the impact of that. The President remains solidly supportive. The Senate has refused to accept those amendments. It's come out of a small group on the House side.
Well, tell us about June of this year, then, when the House rejected any more funds. I mean, you know, you're going back a couple years. Tell us what the most recent thing that the House of Representatives has done regarding high-speed rail.
It is a House provision, which again is the same provision that has been rejected twice by the House-Senate conference and never been enacted into law. Again, has said you can't get money that you haven't asked for from a pot that we haven't created.
So you anticipate more federal funding coming your way?
We are not projecting building into our plans right now. I do expect, and believe me, I've worked in Washington. I spent a lot of time there. I can be as cynical as the next about Washington. I don't expect anything certainly in the near term, but I do think there is a point at which the politics will catch up with the needs about investing in infrastructure overall in this country and investing in cleaner, more sustainable infrastructure in particular. And so I do think there is a point in time at which there will be federal support. I don't think it'll be in the next few years.
So without federal support, without further bond issuances at the state, without state general fund money, and you're willing to provide us with a list of all the private companies that have offered to put money toward this, I guess I can be as cynical as the next two, so sorry.
No.
I can be. I try not to be.
Guessing we could have a good competition.
I try not to be, but you could see where the public would be concerned that this project might begin. You probably can't see it, but a lot of other people can see how this project could begin and end up coming from Madera to Bakersfield, and that's it. Even if you might not, I mean, there's a lot of people that don't even think you have the money to complete that portion, and you don't have the money now. You're saying it's going to come, betting on the come. That's kind of risky business, wouldn't you think?
No, we do have the funds. What's
you
locked
have the 45,
no,
you have the $68 million?
The $6 billion that is for the Central Valley segment from Madera to Bakersfield is fully funded through the combination of state and federal money.
Doesn't the legislation say you have to have all the funds before you start? You have to have all the funds designated before you start?
For a segment.
And you have all the funds designated for this segment, and you're saying this segment's going to be $6 billion?
Right.
What are the cap and trade estimates that you might be counting on?
I don't have estimates.
Is that part of your $6 billion that you're counting on?
No, the $6 billion was appropriated in July of 2012 by the
So what have you
legislature.
spent of that for the initiative, or I think the LAO says that prior to even this initiative, $60 million was spent. What have you spent of the $6 billion now? What do you have left?
What we have spent so far is, I don't have the exact figures. It's been all the
Ballpark.
out of the federal funds so far. I would have to. I don't want to say a number that I have to.
So the $6 billion is $3 billion from the feds, $3 billion from the state. You spent a lot of the money from the feds. Oh, am I wrong? I'm sorry. You're shaking your head.
But it's 3.3 from the feds, 2.7, and we are spending initially, as we ramp up to getting into full construction, which is when the big expenditures come. We're spending federal funds right now.
Right. So, but you don't know how much of those federal funds you've spent, and you do know.
Certainly,
You just
I don't
know
have
right
the number
now.
off the top
Okay.
of my head. I don't want to suggest that we don't know.
Okay, so as we go through this, Mr. Jennings got up and said we can't afford not to build it now. Well, there's a lot of people that think we can't afford to build it now. The authority has, what's the word? You a lawyer?
No.
Okay.
I don't have the slick oratory skills of my counterpart here.
Okay. Okay. But the numbers that the numbers that have been estimated by the authority for job numbers, ridership numbers, project costs, although there's a lot of concerns about that in the general public, and I'm just curious. As I read, I pulled out a lot of stuff. I've spent a lot of time, pulled out, just in the Fresno Bee the other day, somebody from the authority said that, this project would generate 20,000 new construction jobs, in each of the 5 years. That's different than other numbers we have heard. The costs are different than numbers we have heard. The job numbers are different. The ridership numbers have been all over the board. You weren't there for the beginning, and I don't blame you for previous executive directors, but the ridership numbers as each business plan, how many business plans have you guys had from 2008 to now? What version are we on?
It's required to be submitted to the legislature every other year.
Every other year. So you're on about the third business plan?
Right.
Yeah. And those numbers have,
we just submitted one in May of this year. So the next one will be 2016.
Job ridership numbers were reduced this time over last time?
And they will continue to change based on updated. That's the whole point of those plans. I think it would be disingenuous and completely erroneous to put out a number and suggest it would never change. We continue to do refinements of the modeling based on new inputs, based on population estimates, based on demographics, all sorts of things that will change those numbers. It's providing updates of the figures, so they will move as they should.
But as the numbers change, you could see where people would say, hey, this isn't what we voted for. As the job numbers come down, as the ridership...
Job numbers have not come down.
Ridership numbers have come down. If you have less ridership, the initiative requires you to not subsidize the operation costs.
Right, and part of our analysis is a break-even point analysis, to look at the point at which we do that, where we break even on that. And that's an important element that we've added in the last 2 years. And even with the overall reduction of numbers, we are still well above the break-even point in terms of that. So the requirement in 1A to cover the cost of operations remains in place.
And when you say you're well over the break-even, isn't it just a number that you've picked that it's going to cost you and how many riders you need to...
No, not at all.
You really feel like, because the ridership numbers have come down substantially.
They have to be clear. We're talking forecasts, so they are still forecasts, but they are state-of-the-art based on industry standards of how you do these forecasts, and they're on both sides of the equation. The cost of operations, and we've had very extensive external expert review, not just by people who don't like the project, but people who actually spend their careers doing this. We've gone internationally and had them review our estimates of the cost of operations, what it costs to maintain a mile of track, what it costs to run a train, what the cost of power is, all of those types of things. That goes into one side of the equation, and the ridership demand goes into the other. And that's how you arrive at this break-even. So it's not by any way, shape, or form an arbitrary or derived number. It is based on detailed calculations that have been reviewed by the Government Accountability Office, and they found them to be in compliance with every industry-leading standard, and they made no recommendations for anything we should do differently.
So this is a tough issue for everybody because we have been, we weren't told, but it was our impression that just hold off. We're going to get more information, and don't be against it right now, even though you really are against it right now. Don't be against it right now because things are going to change. Well, things have changed, but from my perspective, things have not changed for the better. And I know you can stand. I'd like to ask Mr. Brady a question, if I may. I mean, you can stand there and say these promises have been kept, but Mr. Brady, the Reason Foundation, along with California, UC California at Berkeley, and the Ledge Analyst's Office, and the Auditor of the State of California, and Mr. Justice, I guess Judge Quentin Kopp, who was the originator of this, now says, it should not happen. The two senators you talked about, who were the biggest proponents, have turned their back on it. The new Senate, the Democrat Senate leader, has turned his back on this project. Our Lieutenant Governor has turned his back on this project. So, let me just ask you. I mean, is the funding, is the cost anything like the voters approved? What's your thought?
Well, obviously not, because it was 33, and Mr. Morales admits, actually, when you say 67, it's 67 up to 76. He likes to talk about 67. And I still say you are not being given, remember what he said, the voters approved 33 for the statewide project, phases 1 and 2. This morning, what did he tell you? Oh, we're not required to tell you yet what phase 2 will be. Phase 1 will be at least 67 to 76. A lot of people say much higher than that. So I'm sorry, that just doesn't seem to work. There's another major misperception here, too. We've talked a little bit about Acela. Ms. McNary mentioned this, McNary. That is the closest thing we have to high-speed rail. But they charge a fortune for a ticket. A fortune. And people in New York and Philadelphia and Boston and Washington, they pay it. The East Coast is different than the West Coast. California is not the densely populated, solid city from Washington to Boston. They pay that. But listen to this. The high-speed rail in their business plan says our costs of operating, our costs are going to be 1/6 of Acela. 1/6. Here we are in the most expensive state in the country, California. All railroads have to pay the same thing. Income taxes, salary, pensions, fuel. They all pay the same things. And they're saying, now they have to say this, to make a profit, they're going to say our costs are going to be 10 cents per passenger mile. Oh yeah, Acela is 60 cents, but that's okay. We're going to be 10 cents. It's unbelievable. But they have to do this. This is what you call creative accounting. And you are right, Mr. Larson. All high-speed rail systems in the world operate with heavy subsidies. It's disguised. The Europeans disguise theirs. European accounting rules are very creative. Amtrak and American accounting rules do not permit the kind of accounting that they do. And this is going to be an American railroad, and they're going to be stuck with American accounting methods. And you ask a question also about a guarantor. Yes, a private investor would love it if the state of California said, we guarantee you, Siemens, that you will get a certain amount of income. Sorry, but the LAO said long ago, a guarantee by the state like that is illegal under Proposition 1A. Naturally, you're guaranteeing a subsidy. You can't do that. It's illegal. That's the only thing. Lastly, on that issue of private investors, when Proposition 1A was being debated in the legislature, These folks had a trade report.
Quick clarification on that.
Yes.
For example, Coronado Bridge. Did San Diego not guarantee that when they privatized Coronado, that there would be a baseline? So is that not acceptable in the government private joint enterprise?
Not under Proposition 1A. The extraordinary thing about this proposition, they said you can't have a subsidy. Why did they do that? That's rather extraordinary. When you're going to operate a railroad, for the government to forbid an operating subsidy. Why did they do it? To entice the voters to vote for it.
Got it. Thanks.
That's it. And my last point on that is the LAO has spoken out and said you cannot have a government guarantee. That would violate Proposition 1A. And when Proposition 1A was being debated in the legislature before it went to the voters, there was an investment trade group which gave these folks a report saying no private investor will ever invest in this because it's a money loser. They did not reveal that to the legislature. And no private investor has, in fact, come forward in 6 years. This is incredible, incredulous. He has no private investors who will do this. 6 years is long enough. No federal money, no private money.
Okay.
And like Simidian said, it's all on your backs, and that's not right.
Okay, so for so many reasons, and I respect if you need more time, I respect that, but we have been sitting here I've been sitting here since 2009, patiently.
Long time to wait.
I know. Patiently waiting for a viable plan, patiently waiting for funding, patiently waiting for routes that were on existing corridors, and I think we've come to the point where we find that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. What it's going to cost us, what it's going to cost our children, what it's going to cost our grandchildren, what it's going to cost us here in Fresno County, the juice really isn't worth the squeeze at this point. So I'm sorry I took more time. I would like to move forward today. At least move forward. Look, I hope everybody's looked at the resolution and will consider it. But I'd be willing to move forward today if my colleagues are willing.
Okay. Was it Member Pereira or Member Larson? Member Pereira, do you have some comments?
Yeah, just
to
a few
conclude?
comments. There's so much, gosh, so many ways to go here, but I'm not going to take a lot of time because we've taken a lot already. But I think the only thing I agreed with you on today, Supervisor Pachigian, is when we talk to the folks that are all here today, and thank you all for being here. We know it's been a lot of discussion on each side, and that's that there's a lot of issues that some folks are dealing with respect to land and the impact it's going to have with them, and you will go through that process. That's not why we're here today. She's right. We're here today about, and the question she asks is Prop 1A, is it being honored? Okay, and if I know correctly, and Frank, I know you and I have been in a lot of high-speed rail meetings over the last 3 or 4 years, I believe that's at the heart of one of your lawsuits. Is that not correct? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So, Board, I think that underscores the point here, is the issue of whether Prop 1A has been complied with and whether we should move forward is in the courts. It's not here. I mean, the gentleman, I believe that gentleman with you is arguing that case for you in the courts. And we are going to have a decision on that probably within the next 30 days or so, if not sooner. So really, I think the question is, I mean, it's been great to have this discussion, and I'm sure we're going to need more information. And I would certainly support us moving forward with delaying this at the minimum a few weeks. But really, I think the real answer is let's wait for the court to decide what they're going to do. If the court rules in their favor, we have nothing else to talk about. Is that correct? So, we should wait for that. Let me tell you the risk of our taking an action, even if it's in 2 weeks, if it were to be against it, which I would not support, is just the fact that coming off a trip to Washington, D.C. last week, there were a team of folks from the Fresno Works Group who went to meet with the Federal Railroad Administration and other representatives to talk about the long-term plan and vision for high-speed rail in California. I mean, no question, it's going to connect the state. It's going to connect the valley to the north and south in a way like it never has been before. It's going to open us up to greater opportunities to complement our ag base, to give us the different types of industries that can come here. The issue and the discussion we had in Washington had to do with designating Fresno County as a testing and training facility for high-speed rail. Now, if you think about it, right now the testing and training facility for trains is in, I believe, Pueblo, Colorado. And if you looked at the infrastructure that's in place there and the type of opportunities that's given that state, the question here is why not? Why not for Fresno County? Why not for California? You know, the decision to build high-speed rail is at a much higher pay grade than us. It's in Washington, it's in Sacramento, and it's in the courts. I think the opportunity we have here moving forward, if we hold our ground, is for the decision, which I believe is going to come before the end of the year by the authorities, who is going to gate the maintenance facility. And I think we should be concerned and looking forward to the potential of that type of success. I mean, no matter where that maintenance facility goes in this valley, the valley's going to win. But why not Fresno County? I mean, we lost the UC to UC Merced in the 90s, where this board, previous board, was a part of fumbling that ball and us losing that university. We can't let this board be responsible for that. You're right, sir. Now, let me just close by saying we were well received in Washington. They were very supportive of the fact that, yes, this valley will have this testing and training center, because there's only one place in the state where there's going to be a 110-mile test track to test these trains at over 220 miles an hour, and that's here in the valley. So what we say is, why not Fresno? Why not begin the process and playing the long-term smart card of diversifying our economic base? Because this train will be shooting across this country one day. You know, as much as people were afraid in the 50s of an interstate system and scratch their heads on why it started in Kansas, well, who would argue against the interstate system that we have in place right now connecting this country? That's what made us, one of the things that made us great. Yes, the Golden Gate Bridge had 2,000 lawsuits against it. It was built and funded during the time of the Depression. And you have some more questions, Supervisor?
Sir, if you could please keep your comments down as we conclude this matter.
Yeah, I mean, who would argue against the Golden Gate Bridge today? Yeah, I know decision-making is tough. I understand that. It brings fear to people. But, you know, if you just look at the Afghanistan war in the last 12 years, we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars, but let me just focus on $68 billion that we, the American taxpayers, have paid to rebuild infrastructure in that country. But yet, we have a hard time doing it for ourselves. I mean, we have the vision for our kids and our grandkids, too, just like our parents and grandparents did. And I'll just stop there. I have a whole lot more to say, but I think the day is long, and I certainly would support us moving forward with moving this discussion, preferably after the court decides. But if we're going to come in 2 weeks, then let us take a look at resolutions and alternative resolutions for us to consider.
Okay. Member Case McNary, did you have one last question?
Just while we take advantage of having Jeff here, there was another piece of correspondence we received by board members from Tony Ping. Ping's, I think, a very intelligent, well-read gentleman who asked some questions about train operating and potentially supporting something called a fast rail versus a high-speed rail in terms of the ability to reach 200-plus miles per hour and the displacement of the air mass when you do it, the wind, the noise, the, I don't know, I guess it would be really windy next to one of these trains as they fly by. If we could get some information on plans to mitigate air displacement when you get to those high speeds. Because I know I sat down and calculated one day the 2-hour, 30-minute LA-San Francisco just based on the number of miles that had to be traveled, and you really couldn't stop at any of the stops along the way without losing that volume. So I still have real reservations about being able to hit 220. But could you talk just a little bit about mitigating the elements of atmospheric displacement when a train goes that fast?
To the extent that I can, I will, and I'd be happy to provide you with additional
And I
information.
could forward some of the comments from Mr.
I'd like to
King's.
look at that, and we can get you a response on that specifically. There are aerodynamic issues, certainly, and displacement issues that also play into sound and other things. That's one of the reasons you see the design of high-speed trains with the long, thin nose. That's dealing with the air pressure going through tunnels and other things like that. Those issues were looked at as they are required to be as part of the environmental process, and there's a lot of detail about that. We've also done work when questions were raised early on about some of the impacts. There were questions raised about would the train going by, would it keep, would it blow the blossoms off of some of the trees? Would it keep bees from pollinating? Other things like that. We've looked at that. We've had outside agricultural experts look at it and come to conclusions that really there's nothing any different than with existing trains. I mean, if you take the Amtrak today, coming down, you go by and there are cows 5 yards off the train track and they don't look up when you go by. And that's the same if you ride a high-speed system elsewhere in the world. Most of them, virtually all of them, at some point go through agricultural lands, whether it's France, Italy, Spain, Japan, and it's the same. I mean, so we analyze those. We have to look at those, but that's all done as part of the environmental process. But again, on the specific questions, we'd be happy to take a look at that and get back to you on that. I would also just say generally, I'm happy to come back whenever the board would like, and
We appreciate that.
So I don't want to suggest this is only a one-time occurrence.
I know you're a very, very busy person, and we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here. And I polled the board. I mean, there are 3 members, definitely, that are supportive of this matter being brought back. Are we certain that we want it on the 29th, or do you want 3 weeks?
Mr. Chairman,
Wait for the court decision?
Well, no.
Is that unreasonable?
with all due respect about the court decision, we're not here today to decide if high-speed rail is going to happen. That's not what we're here today for. You're diverting the issue. It's been diverted for 6 years. We might get the high-maintenance facility. Just keep your mouth shut. This is going to happen. Just keep your mouth shut.
What is this about to you, Supervisor?
This is about giving direction to our staff. If this board opposes this project, knowing what you know, knowing what we've learned over the last 6 years, knowing that it's not what they promised the voters,
Okay.
it's about giving direction to staff to bring back the resolution in opposition.
What is your net gain to that? What's the gain? I'm trying to figure out your political gain or business gain for
It's
this.
not
What's your gain?
political.
I'm not certain that we're going to get anywhere because we're not persuading folks. We're explaining our position.
Okay, well, then I would make a motion that we direct staff to take the resolution that's been prepared and work with it and bring it back in opposition of high-speed rail.
Member Pachegan, I think it might be best if we don't do the motion. We know that there are 3 members of the board right now that would like this to be brought back on the 29th. For the sake of unity and peace, just on the scheduling issue alone, would you consider not?
No, you know what? Just don't second it. But I made the motion. I made the motion to give staff direction.
Okay.
And
All
for
right.
this board to consider the resolution which is absolutely factual. And I'd be more than happy to have anybody look at it and tell me what's not factual about the resolution, and that this board opposes the project as it is now. I think we have enough information.
Okay.
That's my motion.
All right.
If it fails for a lack of a second, so be it.
There is a motion. Is there a second on this? There is not a second. This matter, do we have a motion that this item be brought back on July 29th?
So moved.
There is a motion. Is there a second? There's a motion by Member Perea, a second by Member Larson.
With the
Before we
understanding
vote,
that there's it could be various
let me
options
get
too,
that.
based on...
I would like to see, or I'd like to have some discussion when we bring this item back, that if there is the political support for a withdrawal of the offer of support for high-speed rail, that we have a discussion on whether this item could be brought back and as a ballot initiative and let the voters decide. I think that is something worth discussing. Now, I know that there's litigation outstanding, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think if we do end up with a resolution, that we're going to have multiple resolutions and multiple provisions that will be discussed.
You could add that to the resolution today in opposition.
So there will be potential of multiple resolutions coming back.
I'm not aware of any legal constraint that would keep any supervisor from submitting alternative resolutions to
Perfect.
anything.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't have anything in mind. But I don't think there's any constraint on that.
Yeah, I've heard the comment that we've been working on this for 7 years, and in defense of our position, I don't think 2 extra weeks is going to hurt us that much. I think because there's a lot of questions out there that need to be answered, that are up there for us, and I don't disagree with Supervisor Pacheco, and I just think that we need to take all the time that we have for this issue because it's so important and I want that maintenance system here. I really do. But the fact of the matter is, what did the voters vote for?
Sure.
What are the voters getting? And so why can't we take another 2 weeks and get it done?
Okay.
And if I might clarify, and I'm going to support the motion because I do believe this issue is so incredibly important that we have to do it based on the best information and research we possibly can. Having just come back from vacation, it kind of just showed up on an agenda, and I have done over the past quite a bit of review of the issue, but at any given time our plates are quite full with a number of issues. So these are the things I want the time to really go take a look at. I want to pull all the prior board agenda items and minutes to review our discussions and concerns. I don't know that they're any different, but I want to make sure I'm real clear on it. I want to get a copy of the May 2014 business plan to get myself updated to current information because I do believe business plans are living documents that have to be updated. I would like to request of Mr. Morales to help me get that report for the Acela report to take a look at their viability as an independently standing rail line because I think that's the only comparable in the United States. So I can review current passenger projections and fare proposals as well as funding strategy. Because for me as an individual on this board, it's the ability to pay for this program. Could it fail and leave a partially completed project in the middle of our region? I think that would be incredibly damaging. Is it sustainable? And so the passenger projection funding strategy, I want to call a few of our local businesses again because I've talked to them in the past. I haven't received calls into the office for a while, and I think I'd like to get a business perspective on businesses that could be damaged or shut down based on it. And a chance to relook. The LAO has in the past been pretty critical. I'd like to review what their more recent statements are. And the Oversight Committee, if it still exists, there was an Oversight Committee of the past Caltrans directors and others who was pretty critical of the funding process. I want to see where they are today. And I'd like to have enough time to allow Mr. Tom Richards to be here. He's a man I highly regard and respect. I think he does his homework. And I'd like to talk to him directly to get some of his perspectives today. So there is a lot of work to be done in the next 2 weeks, and I think it's valuable research that I, as one member of this board, needs to do before moving forward with a pretty big choice. So that's what I plan to do.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
All right. This matter will be brought back in 2 weeks. Madam Clerk and County Council, we were going to break at